Economy is defined as the wealth and resources of a country or region, especially in terms of the production and consumption of goods and services. However, in this modern age, economies are global, not limited by state lines. The global economic system established has led to globalization. Globalization is the international system of providing and selling goods across the world. In this system, countries depend on each other for production, with each country being responsible for different parts of production in the system. Countries with large amounts of raw materials mine, harvest, or somehow gather these materials, and then ship them to other countries for production. These raw materials are exported to another country, where they are brought to factories and turned into a product. Once products have been made, they are then shipped all over the world to be sold. Consumers then have access to buy these products. This system expects countries to work together and relies on each stage of the manufacturing process to run smoothly. Without this system, consumers would have limited access to goods made in other countries.
A prime example of the effects of this complex system is the fast fashion industry, which stimulates the global economic system. Fast fashion is the mass production of clothes that are trendy and inexpensive. They are able to mimic expensive name brand clothing everyone wants and sell it fast and cheap. Fast fashion works because of a reliance on cheap labor. Many of these laborers are young and get paid a lot less than the traditional American minimum wage. For more insight on this subject, we sat down with Dr. Leslie Stoll, a professor at Miami University.
So my name is Leslie Stoll, and I'm a professor here at Miami, and I have a joint appointment. I am 50% in the business school in the marketing department and 50% in the College of Creative Arts with the fashion program. I completed a bachelor's degree in fashion merchandising. My master's degree was in management from Purdue. My bachelor's was at the University of Nebraska. My PhD was at Michigan State studying merchandise management. So I've always been looking at retailing and management of product and people for most of my career. Globalization is important to us because it allows the production of these cheaper styles that imitate the luxury styles, or if we're trickling up, imitate the styles that we're seeing in the lower classes. So it enables those to be produced really quickly and really cheaply. So it's really kind of a complicated question, I think, that we have here, looking at how information moves across society, and then we have the production capabilities moving around the globe. We're constantly trying to get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, so we always keep going to countries that are lower labor costs. So it's really, I see as a pretty complicated question.
With the fast pace and intense nature of the fast fashion industry, a question arises. How are fast fashion industries affecting the developing countries that are responsible for manufacturing these products? Fast fashion has some clear benefits for these developing countries, with the greatest impact being job creation. Although jobs are created for everyone, women have especially benefited from these companies. Because of the high demand and rush on this clothing, manufacturers have started subcontracting women who can work from home. These women are tasked with doing the finer detail and more specialized work, especially embellishing. These jobs are often the only jobs these women can have because of their husband's wishes. But the money that they earn from these jobs is often used to send their children to school or for childcare purposes.
In terms of laborers in the countries where we're producing product, in some cases there are some companies that are really doing great things for the people that work for them. They're educating them, they're giving them health care, they're giving them housing, and it's a great thing for them. And in many cases, the wages for those workers are some of the highest in their countries. But we know that that's not true in all cases. I think those are probably a little more rare, those kind of companies that are really doing a nice job and taking care of their employees. there's a lot of other companies that are truly exploiting their employees. So I don't think you can just blanket statement, we're exploiting people like crazy. I think it's a case where it depends on the company and their stance for how they want to treat their workers, because there are some that do a great job and then there's some that are just horrible.
Although some good has come from fast fashion, there are still great negatives towards it. For example, the high level of demand coming from the fast fashion retailers puts high amounts of pressure onto the manufacturers. This leads to overworking laborers and the creation of even lower quality clothing. If the manufacturers chose not to step up to the retailers' demands, they run the risk of those retailers moving to a different country. This would cause their manufacturing sites to close down, which would result in job loss and would decimate these countries' economies.
Because haute couture clothing has been so exclusive and expensive, modern globalization has shifted consumers' thought process into wanting the trendiest clothes in the cheapest ways possible, while not futuristically thinking of the detriments to numerous countries. Creating cheap clothing in the United States would be detrimental to the retailers and wholesalers. Thus, businesses outsourced their factories to developing countries where their labor costs were lower, as well as material costs. Developing nations, in turn, felt the effects of having large-scale factories in their countries, even though it created some type of employment opportunity. Not only do these factories create environmental problems in low-income countries, but additionally they create economic stunts in the American economy. Haute couture fashion houses were used to using expensive fabrics and releasing pricey clothing lines, and these haute couture retailers were used to people buying their products. In modern day, since consumers are looking for cheap clothes with the demand for trendy products, the people of society are deviating from the norm of spending enormous amounts of money on clothing apparel. Instead, most medium-income and low-income families are shopping at fast fashion retailers in order to spend their money elsewhere. This in turn eliminates the enormous stimulation of the economy when consumers were dependent upon the haute couture clothing lines.
Even clothing companies that once resisted the effects of globalization have been pushed towards adopting these new global economic methods. This has become almost inevitable within such a competitive capitalistic society and increasingly interconnected world such as the one we live in. A perfect example of this is Zara, a popular fast fashion retailer often regarded as one of the pioneers of the industry and its global popularity. For most of its history, Zara remained an exception to the common practice of outsourcing production of their clothing to factories in partially developed countries. In other words, Zara was known as an exception to globalization. Its factories remained in developed countries such as Spain and Portugal. Zara therefore retained an image of being a fast fashion retailer which was able to effectively control the quality of their products no matter how quickly they were being produced and sold. However, in the past decade, Zara has adopted many of the common traits of fast fashion retailers. The most obvious change shown is in Zara's recent outsourcing of its factories to partially developed countries such as India, Morocco, and Turkey. Still, there are many other factors that have pushed Zara and other fast fashion retailers to make changes to their business practices. An increasingly competitive market has required retailers to follow certain unwritten rules in order to make a profit and stay alive in the industry. These include, but are not limited to, investing in information infrastructure in order to assess patterns of consumer trends and fads, rapid synthesis of this data into clothing with variety and consumer appeal, a supply chain that can support these rapid processes, and the need to open large amounts of retail locations around the world to sell as much of this manufactured product as possible. Fast fashion retailers and businesses in general are therefore actively searching for new ways to achieve all of these requirements for successful businesses without having to spend copious amounts of money on them. They are willing to sacrifice their ethics and social reputation for a greater economic gain, something which they have learned will surely come to them if they are able to be competitive in their market. Thus, Zara and many other fast fashion retailers are converting to these practices in order to entice consumers to contribute to their hierarchical standing within the global economy of the fashion industry.
In conclusion, the fashion industry relies on the global economy to get base materials from developing countries using the vast shipping network that is developed to transport those materials to the correct spot to get processed and finally to the consumer. Fashion industry has had an impact on the global economy that simply cannot be ignored. The future of the fashion industry seems unsure, because as wages begin to increase, that cost will start to affect the economic activities of companies around the world. But on the other hand, as the processes of shipping and processing are improved, the cost of these procedures should decrease. We must wait and see how all this affects the system in the near and distant future. Unfortunately, there are some negatives to having a global system like the one that is currently implemented. For starters, the entire industry relies a lot on things that are independent of each other, mainly the cheap labor for gathering materials, the dependence on shipping companies to protect and move cargo efficiently and quickly, and the factories to remain operational and produce what the clothing companies believes are in fashion. If any of these parts become unable to operate, more expensive, or start lagging behind, the whole supply chain can suffer, from the acquisition of raw materials to the consumers in the developed countries. The global market has allowed these fast fashion companies to specialize parts of their production process throughout the world and therefore provide their services at an extremely low price and with extreme efficiency.
Well, one thing I've been reading about just in the past few weeks in Women's Wear Daily and some of the National Retail Federation newsletters that come out is the waste of the fashion industry and how some cities like Montreal just signed some legislation this week where they're gonna almost outlaw all this waste. So like all those single-use plastics, you can't throw clothing and textile products into the trash, and that's going to have a huge impact on the industry and on society, because Montreal was not the first city actually to sign legislation like that. The article mentioned maybe a dozen or more cities. I think all of them were in Europe. So if that starts spreading globally, that's really going to be an interesting development on what goes on with the fashion industry. I think that's, fast fashion will probably be dead, and we'll have to go back to like when I was in college and I bought my jeans and I had to wear the same pair of jeans for 15 years until they, were falling off of my body because they were threadbare. So, I don't know, I just think it's something interesting that we need to watch as we move forward.
Globalization and the economy as a whole have affected us by having all our financial markets being connected, so if one market crashes, everyone takes a hit. But it still allows for a more stable and efficient economy overall.